Hi, I'm Orgone and welcome to my channel. Tonight we're going to be making some Orgonite, specifically a pyramid lamp called Chakra Glows, and it looks like this. So before we get started, I just want to show you what all you'll need to make this pyramid lamp. First of all, you will need some resin. I use polyester casting resin. I get it in a big gallon jug that's not easy to pour small amounts from. So I put my resin in a jar like this. So I do recommend the polyester casting resin for making Orgonite because the hardening time is much faster, and you can build a pyramid within half a day or a whole day. You can get the whole thing made, all of the layers included. If you're certainly welcome to use the epoxy resin. It looks nice. I don't know that it would, I'm not so sure that I would say it looks nicer than the polyester casting resin, but if that's what you have, you're more than welcome to use that. It will be just fine. It will just take you a little bit longer to make a pyramid with the epoxy resin. You'll also need a mixing cup and stirring stick and a measuring cup. I use an ounce measuring cup to measure my resin. For the apex of the pyramid, I have a piece of amethyst that is going to go there, and that'll look really nice. And I've got a pound of clear quartz crystal, and instead of using colored crystals to make layers like that, I'm using inks, colored inks. We're gonna dye the layers, and the quartz crystal will be inside, so it won't matter that it's clear because we're going to color the resin around it. Also, I recommend a pendant, like a chakra symbol or some sacred geometry like this. And it had a little loop on there to hang on a necklace. I just used my wire cutters and cut that off of there. And also we need 33 feet of fairy lights. Specifically, if you can get them on the copper wire, I think that's better, but sometimes the wire is silver colored. But first, I just want to check and make sure that they work. Well, actually, I want to suggest that when you get your fairy lights, you want them to have a USB plug or a wall outlet plug. You don't want the battery kind. That is a whole headache to keep up with the batteries, and yeah, it's just not recommended. So I'm gonna test these lights real quick to make sure they work before I put them in my project. Yep, they work. Well, let's make sure that the remote works. And you have to remember that the remote usually comes with a little battery protector that you just need to pull out. It's clear, so you probably can't see it, but you need to pull that out so that your remote will work. I keep it in the little plastic bag until I sell the piece, but let's just see if this will work. And when you use the remote with these types of lights, you need to point it at the USB plug and not at the lights themselves. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So it looks like the lights are working properly, and now we can get started putting our lights in. Oh yeah, I forgot to show you. You're going to need a pyramid mold. This is the kind I use. It has a silicone insert for the pyramid, and it has a plastic housing that allows it to stand up straight while you're pouring in your resin and letting it cure. So I'm going to unfurl these lights and get them off of this card, and then I'll show you how to what to do with the lights. Okay, I forgot to mention that the inks that I use with my polyester casting resin are oil candy color colors. I use alcohol inks with the epoxy resin, but they don't work well with they're not meant for the polyester casting resin. They're just meant for the epoxy resin. So I have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple dyes for this project. And now it's time to get the lights in the mold. And it's so important that you get the fairy lights because they are on a metal wire. And it makes, when you put it in the mold, it kind of makes a cage. So we're going to be pouring our gemstones through this cage of lights, but it has a great end product, and I think you'll really like it. So I start with the end that has nothing attached to it, and I just stick it straight down in the center, and I just keep putting more. I grab some more wire and just point it down to the center of the pyramid. It'll pop back up a little bit, but just keep going, and you're just going to keep feeding the wire into the mold. And you know, if any sticks out, just stuff it back down in there. And yeah, just keep doing this until you get it all stuffed in there. Okay, so we have our fairy lights stuffed in our mold, and as we get resin hardening in here, we will be able to push it down a little more. But for to start, this is just fine. And once we get to the last layer, you're going to want to make sure that the plastic coating on the wire that is at the where the plug is, you want to get that plastic covering a little bit inside the resin so that the wire is protected. If you let the wire stick out, the bare wire, it's gonna be more susceptible to break, and you don't want that. So be sure that you tuck a little bit of that plastic coating into your last layer of resin. And we're going to take our crystal and stuff that down in the center all the way down to the point. You may have to move over some some wires to shove it down in there, but it should fit just fine. Once you have that fitting, go ahead and pull it back out, and we're gonna start with our first layer of resin. And I am going to start with 1 ounce of resin. Pour it in your mixing cup. And for the hardening drops that I used with the polyester casting resin, I use 9 drops to start, and then 9 drops for every ounce thereafter. So with 1 ounce, I'm going to add 18 drops. And you want to stir it up real good. If you're using the epoxy resin, you want to make sure to stir that for at least 2 minutes. With the polyester casting resin, you just need to stir it until it becomes clear. And maybe a few moments thereafter, just to be sure. I pour this straight down all the way. We're gonna leave this layer clear, and then we'll start dyeing our resin as we move up. And now I'm taking my amethyst crystal point and sticking it down into the resin, into the apex of the pyramid. And that looks good. So we're just gonna let that harden, and we'll come back to do our first colored layer, and I will see you then. Okay, we're back to do our first colored layer, and I forgot to mention that since we're using different colors, we're going to need several more mixing cups. So we've got 6 colors to mix, so you need about 6 cups to mix your resin in. I like to get the disposable cups. You can also get a plastic cup or a set of plastic cups that has measurements listed right on the label, and they're clear, so you can pour, say, 3 or 4 ounces at once without having to pour it out in the single 1 ounce cups. So I am going to start with purple and go work our way down to red. And for my first layer, I'm going to do about 3/4 of an ounce, and just pour that into our mixing cup. And for this, I'm going to do about 15 drops of hardener. And I'm going to add probably, let's see, so I added 2 drops of the violet, and I'm going to stir that up. It's looking a little blue, so I'm going to add more color to it just to see if we can bring out that violet in there. Yeah, that's the ticket. We've got our violet now. So I think I added like 4 or 5 drops of that color. And since we can't see it go clear, we're just going to keep mixing it for a little while and make sure that it's all blended. Also, I just went and got more stirring sticks for the different colors. And I'm going to use one of these sticks just to test out my first layer. Yep, it's congealed. It's been about 45 minutes since I poured the last layer. And I'm just going to pour this right on in. So that mixing cup and stick is trash at this point. I'll use a new one for my next color when the time comes. And we're just gonna let that, oh, I forgot to put our stones in. If any of you are fans of The Price is Right, you know about the game called Plinko, where you drop a coin through all this pegged boards and they kind of make their way down. That's what it's like putting stones in this light cage. Oh, I didn't measure how many grams of stones I put in this layer. I'm sorry about that. I just kind of sprinkled some in there. You don't need to pack it out, but make sure you get some in there. So we are just, make sure there aren't any stones sticking up. You want to use your stirring stick to press those down back into your color. There you go. And we're just gonna wait about 45 minutes and I'll come back to do our layer of blue. Join me then. Welcome back. It's been probably about an hour since I did the violet layer, so it's now time to do the layer of blue. And I think I am going to do an ounce of resin for this layer. Pour that in my new mixing cup. We want to make sure not to blend the colors. And for 1 ounce of resin, we'll need 18 drops of hardener. Shaking up my glue, and we're going to add it to our resin and hardening drops. I added 4 drops of the blue. That looks like it's going to be a pretty blue in our piece, especially when the lights glow through it. So we're just going to pour that over our last layer. And you may notice that I am not putting any metal in between the layers. That's because our fairy lights is on 33 feet of copper wire, so that's going to serve as our metal for this piece. And we're just going to sprinkle our clear crystal quartz gemstones into this layer. So I put in about 35 grams of clear crystal quartz gravel in there. I'm going to use my mixing stick to kind of poke them down through the wires. Some of them get caught, and you just kind of have to help them back into the layer where they belong. And once you have all of the little stones tucked out of the way, we are going to let it sit, and I will come back in about an hour or 45 minutes to do our layer of green. Join me then. Welcome back. I just wanted to let you know that I did one layer without you. I did the green layer, and let me catch you up to speed on the particulars of that layer. I used 1.5 ounces of resin. I used 23 drops of hardener, about 6 to 7 drops of the green dye, and 50 grams of the quartz crystals. And I let that harden, and we are at the yellow layer now. So I am probably gonna do 2 ounces of resin for this layer. So with 2 ounces of resin, I'm going to add 27 drops of hardener. Let's put in the yellow dye. Shake it up real good, and let's see. I put in 8 drops, and let's see what that looks like. That looks rich enough. So I'm just going to press my cage down a little bit. Now that we've gotten it sturdy at the bottom, it allows me to press it down some and get it to stay That's what I love about this being on a wire, that I can bend and have it stay instead of just flopping around. So I'm pouring in my yellow layer, and let's add the quartz crystal pieces. I added 55 grams of the crystals. Now I'm just going to poke them down through these wires here, make sure that it's all contained in that layer. Looks good. I'm just going to let that harden, and I should see you back here in about 45 minutes. Join me then. Okay, welcome back, and it's time to do our orange layer now. Okay, so I think I'm going to do 3 ounces of resin for this layer. So with 3 ounces of resin, I will do 3 ounces of resin is 45 drops of hardener. And to add my orange candy color. These inks really are meant for food and candy, but I find that they work really well in my polyester casting resin. So I added 9 drops of the orange dye. Well, that color looks rich enough to me. I am going to pour it in here. Let me just test out. Oh no, I'm glad I didn't pour it in yet. This yellow is not hardened yet, or not congealed, so I kind of wasted this layer, because this is gonna harden before I get to pour it. So that is a lesson learned. Always check your last layer to make sure that it has congealed before you add another layer. I should have checked, and it's my fault for not doing that, so I kind of wasted 3 ounces of resin, unfortunately. Well, I learned something. So join me again when I can pour my orange layer. Okay, so I've been waiting for this yellow to congeal so that I could add my layer of orange, which, as you know, I had already poured, and it is pretty viscous right now, but I feel like I can still pour it in and the layers won't mix. Yeah, that looks good. It's still fluid enough to pour in the space and accept the crystals that I'm about to pour into it, so yay. But definitely learn from my mistake to always check your last layer before you pour new resin. So I poured about 50 grams of crystals in this layer, and I'm just poking them down into the resin, making sure that they stay contained within their layer. Perfect. And I also want to clarify, when I did the hardening drops for this layer, for 3 ounces, I said that it was 45 drops, and it should have actually been 36. So, but being 45 drops is not going to harm it in any way. It may even help it cure a little faster. But I did want to point that out just in case you noticed. So I will see you in about 45 minutes, maybe less, now that this has already gotten to hardening. So we'll get started at that time. welcome back. It's time to do our red layer. And so now that it has congealed, I am just pushing down the copper, the fairy lights wire, so that it'll fit in our piece. So if it doesn't fit, I'm going to have to put a layer of beach sand at the bottom just to give it something to contain it all. And remember, since this is our last layer, hopefully, we want to bury the plastic coating on the wire. So we want to make sure that that is tucked away inside the resin and not showing any bare wire. And just to make sure that I get all of this, I'm going to add, I was going to add 4 ounces of resin, but I'm thinking either 4.5 or 5. So let's start with 4.5. Let me just see how that looks. So I used 4.75 ounces. So that's gonna be about 60 drops of hardener. Sorry I didn't get that under the camera, but I did add the drops. And whenever you have a larger amount of resin like this, you want to be really careful to really stir it up good. I'm going to stir it up without the dye first, just because I want to see it get clear and know that it's mixed up properly. Okay, so let's go ahead and add our dye. Not a lot of dye left in here, so let's hope we have enough. I put in 8 drops. The color looks good, so I don't think I need to add any more color to it. Just gonna push this down just a little bit more if I can. Every little bit helps. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and pour my red. Actually, I do want to add a little bit more dye to that. It did look kind of weak when I poured some, so let's beef it up a little bit. So I added 4 more drops. That's 12 drops of red dye in all. Okay, time to pour the rest. Okay, so I've poured all of my resin and I still have some wires that are exposed. So I'm gonna have to add another layer after this one just to contain the wires. We don't want to have any exposed wires for our finished product. So yeah, I'm gonna let that congeal and I'll come back to do another layer. I haven't decided whether I want to do a layer of sand or just a clear layer. I'll think about it and we'll see what we're gonna do when I come back to join me. Okay, so we are back for our last layer. Since we finished the last layer of our colors and there's still exposed wires, we need to bury them, and I gave it some thought and I feel like I'd like to finish it off with a layer of beach sand. So I'm going to pour about 4 ounces of resin and then add my beach sand. And just so you know, beach sand is made up of tiny little quartz crystal pieces, so it's a crystal too. So I ended up doing 4.5. So I'm going to add 50 drops of hardener to this 4.5 ounces of resin. So 50 drops, here we go. And in case I didn't mention it, I just wanted to explain why we're doing this in layers. Orgonite is made up of several layers. Even just 2 layers is fine, but it's made up of layers of crystals, metals, and gemstones. And you alternate the layers. And anyway, those layers act as a filtration device for protecting against the EMF radiation coming from cell phones, Wi-Fi towers, and 5G technologies. So Orgonite helps to combat that and turn bad energy into good, frankly, in its most simplest terms. So we're all good with this. It's turned clear, and I'm gonna just pour it out. I didn't pour the whole thing. Let's see how much I have left in here. Maybe an ounce, maybe about probably 3/4 of an ounce left. It's getting late. I'm getting kind of punchy. And we do have our wire, the covered part of the wire, in the resin, so there's no exposed copper wire that could bend and break. So that's good. I'm going to let this cure overnight, and I'll demold it in the morning and add the sacred geometry pendant to the outside of it. So this looks good. I'm just going to sprinkle a little more sand in there for good measure. I used 222 grams of beach sand in this last layer here. Just kind of helping it along with my stirring stick. And one thing about putting things in resin, especially like this beach sand, is that it's going to look wet and it's going to stay that way. So if you don't mind the wet look, then go for it. I love it. I think it looks great in Orgonite, so I think it's going to be a good base. I'm so excited to demold this in the morning because I have never made a pyramid where I dyed the resin. I'm usually making pyramids out of gemstones and crystals that are already colored, and so I chose to use the clear quartz crystals with dyes for the resin, and so I hope it's gonna come out like I think it will, but only time will tell. And please join me in the morning for our demolding, and we're gonna add the feet to it, and yeah, we're just gonna see what what's going on with it tomorrow. So please join me. Well, good morning. It is time to demold our project. Let's see what we have. All the layers turned out, the colors look good. Let's see what it looks like as a lamp. Well, before we test that out, I need to sand these rough and rugged edges here. They're really sharp and gnarly. So I'm going to sand those down, and we'll put some feet on it, and then we'll plug this baby in. Join me then. Okay, so I have it all sanded down on the edges. They're nice and smooth. I prefer to use an emery board to do my sanding. I get a lot more control out of it than I do sandpaper, but if sandpaper is what you have, that should work just fine. And now it's time to put on our feet. I use these cabinet dampening bumpers for the feet. They're little 1/2-inch circles, and they stick perfectly on the corners of our piece, and they'll help it sit better. Got our feet on. So I got the feet put on, and looking at the edges, there's a little bit of material mark on it from where I had it sitting upside down in my lap sanding it. So I'm just going to hit it with the clear coat, Krylon Color Master Cover Max Clear, but any clear coat will work. I'm just going to do it just enough to help it shine again. And then when that dries, we're gonna apply our emblem. Okay, so I was not able to glue the emblem onto the pyramid because it was just too convex, and it just wasn't gonna stay. I even tried the super glue, and that didn't work. So I'm just gonna leave it as is because I think it's beautiful as it is. So let's turn this baby on. There we go. Let's try another setting. Ooh, I like that one. I think the colors turned out really pretty in this, and it's just not like I was expecting, but I really love it. It's a little hard to see the purple crystal in the center, but it's still there, and I can see it peeking through. I think the lights just make it, and the colors look good. And I put that little layer of sand at the bottom, and that kind of grounds it out. So it's a nice piece. Anyway, there you have it. So if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. It makes me super happy when you do that. Also, subscribe to my channel for more great Orgonite inspiration. I'm going to close this video with some pictures of other Orgonite projects, and maybe we can do those someday. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to find out when new Orgonite projects are released. This is Orgone Nick. Thank you for joining me here today in my Orgonite studio. Have yourself an amazing rest of your day.